1960. He retired in 1952. And his dream was one day to go out of business, because he felt like if that day ever came about, that would mean that African Americans would have public access to the open roads during their traveling. He didn't quite live long enough to see that. He retired in 1952, but his wife respected his wishes, and she kept it going to 64, and from 64 to 67, when Maira comes on stage, we would go into the gentleman that kept it going those last 2 years of the Green Book. How many people here were born in the 1930s? Let's see a show of hands. Okay, how about the 1940s? 1950s? 1960s? All right, the 1970s? Okay, the 1980s? Okay, now we give it to the millennials. The millennials. Okay. Well, you know, the Green Book started back in the 30s. And in the 30s, it was very hard for African Americans to travel. This was, 1936 was 20 years before Dr. King and the Montgomery bus boycott. So there really wasn't a national leader on the scene. There were local leaders, regional leaders. Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was here in New York, and there were people throughout the country doing things. But for a national leader, the black community really didn't have a national leader. So Victor Green took it on himself to do something. I think that's the beauty of this whole endeavor. How just one person, he didn't get a government grant, he didn't get a handout, he just went in his own pocket. And he put some money aside, and he was able to turn out a book annually for many years. Once things got a little better for Victor Green, he was able to move his operation from his house at 930 St. Nicholas to 200 West 135th Street, right above Small's Paradise. How many of you have been to Small's Paradise? So I guess a lot of you from Harlem. Is that right? Okay, all right. Well, Victor was upstairs, and down the hall from Victor, there was a union, the National Association of Postal and Federal Employees, that's still in existence today. Any members here from that union? Well, that union started in 1911 at Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. Blacks could not belong to the AFL or the CIO, and they could not join either one of those unions in 1960 when John Kennedy signed an executive order that's saying that unions could not discriminate within the federal system. But at Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, there was a gentleman there named John Wesley Dobbs, and he was one of the mainstays of this union. Years later, his grandson would be the first mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson. So this history kind of goes back and forth. And from John Wesley Dobbs from 1911, and he started the same year that Victor started in the post office over in Montclair, New Jersey, over in Hackensack, New Jersey, the same year. And so the forces merged together. Victor needed people to get the word out, and these letter carriers. This was not part of their job description, asking people just about being in this publication. Just like today, the letter carrier know more about us than anybody else in our neighborhoods. They know what kind of mail we get, what kind of bills we're receiving, what we're paying, what we're not paying, who we're ducking. And so it was the same way back then. But they would ask, not everyone, they would ask certain families on their routes about being in this publication. And from there, the publication grew. And the Green Book wasn't just in the South, it was throughout the United States, because Jim Crow was pretty much everywhere. When Victor was starting this publication, he couldn't find a printer to print this book. Howard Gleamer is here today. I'd like to raise his hand. Howard's father printed the first Green Books. And Howard remembers when Victor showed up. He was a tall, elegant man, dressed well, and it's the only black customer that the Gleamer family had in their business. And I think Howard mentioned to me that there were some printers who did not want to print Victor's publication. But Howard's father, being the owner, made them do the right thing. So Victor's road was very stormy, but he had a lot of help, a lot of support. And from that, this publication grew. The Pullman Porters sold the book. Esso got involved. That was part of Standard Oil. And a lot of folks wondered how come Esso would get involved with an endeavor like this. John D. Rockefeller Sr. Had a program to train black men to run their own service stations. And this went on for numerous years. John D. Rockefeller Sr.'s wife was part of a family out of Massachusetts that had relocated to Ohio. They were abolitionists, and their home was part of the Underground Railroad. John D. Rockefeller's wife's family's maiden name was, well, his wife's maiden name was Spelman. The college in Atlanta is named after his wife's family. If you go on Spelman's campus, you will see a painting of Minister Spelman, who was a congregational minister, and his wife. And the church on campus is called Sister Chapel. When I lived in Atlanta, I thought it was called Sister Chapel because all the sisters who went there. But it's called Sister Chapel because of Laura and Lucy Spelman, and Laura was John D. Rockefeller's wife. So that kind of gives you an overview of how this publication came about and how it was a yearly publication. There was no phone numbers in the Green Book. 95% of the businesses in the Green Book were black-owned businesses. So if you're traveling from New York, let's say to Shreveport, Louisiana, and you're mapping out your route, and you're stopping along the way, you'd be stopping at houses that didn't know you were coming. They had no idea. You would just show up, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the morning, and you would knock on the door. And you would say, I saw you listed in the Green Book. And that's how this journey took place. And really, to me, it's like a love letter for people to have their doors open to strangers from all parts of the country who are traveling. And I think that's what the community was about. Dr. King, in one of his last books, talked about community or chaos. And I think this was community at its best. And I think today, why some of you are here because you're fascinated by this story, because it is a very unique story. I think Danny asked me once, how come Victor Green's story wasn't told earlier? How come it fell between the cracks of history? We'll talk about that later, why you think that happened. But I think we want to get ready to show the film. Here are 3 projects that I've been working on. This is my children's book, Ruth in the Green Book. Little girl, she's 8 years old, traveling from Chicago down to Selma, Alabama. And what her family goes through, this is 1954, what they go through on this journey until they get a copy of the Green Book. But it's very upsetting to Ruth on the way. Her mother did not want to go on this trip originally because she didn't want this trip to harm her daughter, to change her daughter. And it was very distressful to Ruth starting out. She didn't know her color was such an issue and that it was something that she should be ashamed of. But she wasn't ashamed of it. And the Green Book helped a great deal in making this trip work out better for her and her family. And the second publication here is my play called The Green Book. That takes place in 1956. And that play just ended in Chicago. Here I have a salesman for The Green Book, and he's talking to a soldier who's a captain in the Army, and this is in St. Joe, Missouri. I'm sorry, it's in Jefferson City, Missouri, and he's traveling with his wife, and like everyone else, they have no lodging on the open road. And this is 1956, and he's going off to the Korean War. And the lady pouring the coffee, this is her home. The homes were called tourist homes. I guess today you'd call them a bed and breakfast or Airbnb. But back then they were called tourist homes, and the husband is an attorney, and the lady in the red dress is the captain's wife. And in the lower, well, this is fast. In the lower picture here is the Holocaust survivor character. In this play, I have a Jewish character who's traveling across country in 1956. He's a survivor of Buchenwald, and he's going across country to visit a friend of his who was at the camp, who was in Patton's Third Army, who came in, and he sort of helped him get back on his feet and to gain strength to carry on. And this is the young character in the play. Her name is Nina, and she's like the future. You know, she's going to be going to school down at A&T College, and she's going to be part of the sit-ins in the 60s. So this is the cast. So I guess we'll go to the next. And this is the film that I'm working on with Becky. I was in Atlanta, and the play was running, and the Atlanta Puppetry Center, which is the largest puppetry center in the United States, I bumped into someone. Everything had been really by chance, I guess. I guess things happen for a reason. And I mentioned to them about my children's book. And from there, it turned into a puppet show with marionettes and hand puppets and the whole works. So Becky showed up the last night of performance, her and her husband Jimmy, and she had 30 graduate students with her. And from there, we started talking, and I said, you know, I think a documentary film would be really great, but I don't have a clue how to get one started or have the facilities. And Becky, being a professor at SCAD, was able to make all of that happen. The guy at the end kneeling is Rob. He's sitting here, right here. Rob, raise your hand. Rob's our camera guy. I also like to add that Rob has a time machine in his backyard that he's building. But anyway, so we're shooting this, and this is right on the corner across from where Victor Green office was. This is that Churches on 135th Street. That's right up from that's 7th, 8th, 7th Avenue.
Edgecombe.
8th Avenue?
Edgecombe.
Edgecombe. No, it's not Edgecombe. That's Fred Douglas. The Harlem folks call it 7th and 8th Avenue, but the newcomers, we call it Frederick Douglass and Adam Clay Powell. Yeah. 135th, exactly. So this is the film, and we've been shooting a lot of different places: Atlanta, Birmingham. Becky and her husband went down to Myrtle Beach, and so we got some good footage. And we have a lady here, Phyllis. You raise your hand. Phyllis was one of the early people that was working in the travel business in Detroit. And I think you were a ticket person or a flight attendant.
Neither. I work with computers.
Worked in computers.
I worked in the first team when we put computers in travel.
Okay. Well, I've spoken to some, I think we have some people in the film who were early flight attendants.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. But travel for everyone was very difficult. If you was African American, you were traveling, you could have been Duke Ellington or the boys, it didn't matter. You really was at the mercy of the road. And travel was a real hardship and quite dangerous. And it still is. It still is. You know, if you're black, your color is almost your battlefield. If you're Jewish, your religion is the battlefield. If you're gay, your sexuality is the battlefield. If you're born outside this country, that's your battlefield. So it's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think we took our foot off the pedal for a while, and now we have to start back up. Like you make 2 steps forward, then you take a step back. So we've been sort of doing that. So I think hopefully with this new energy that's in the streets with the young people and the old people like ourselves, that we can just carry on the struggle a little bit longer and do it a little smarter and be more persistent and just realize it's for the long haul.
Another round of applause for Calvin. Okay, so now we'll screen footage from the Green Book Chronicles, the work in progress, and then we'll follow with the question and answer. So we'll be kind of rearranging the stage during that point, so don't go anywhere because a great conversation is to follow. So thank you.
Traveling on business or pleasure, the chances are even that you'll travel by motor car. The motor car has been the key to open new horizons, not for the few, but for all.
We drove constantly, we didn't stop.
Segregation, separation was just in the South.
Travel was very difficult during those days.
They had the colored restrooms and they were filthy. But what do you do if that's all you got?
You drove swiftly. You made no fuss or any type of commotion to try to attract any attention whatsoever. It was dangerous.
This wasn't a history that was told in school books. This wasn't a history that you could find.
And he at first was surprised that there was such a thing as a black Marine.
You don't believe it's a different, that's a Tuskegee Airman. He'll tell you.
Victor Green was a mailman for 40 years, lived in Harlem, lived right across the street from Duke Ellington. Victor Green was a man with a 7th grade education. Yet he put together a publication that touched all aspects of life.
My parents liked to travel, so they figured that was helpful for our education. The thing was, find the black section of town, and you use the Green Book to find places to eat. So I always knew that we couldn't stay places.
Mr. Green was distinguished and even as a child, a very lovely man. And I would say it was unusual to have a black client working with a white printer.
With the Green Book, my dad found what was the first place that he could stay between New Orleans and the end of the drive for that first day. And the next day we drove all the way to Miami. And we stayed at the Lord Calvert Hotel, which was listed in the Green Book also.
Esso station had these books in a rack outside the pump. And so I picked up one, found Crosby's Motel in Pensacola, Florida.
My parents owned the first fully accredited African-American owned travel agency in the United States. They were able to convince people, and over time it took many groups and eventually ended up taking thousands of people abroad.
He described the fighting and the dogs being sick on them and what, people who had died to fight for the right to us to stay anywhere.
After the Emancipation Proclamation was signed to grant African Americans freedom from slavery, the struggle for equal rights and dignity continued for nearly 100 years. State and local Jim Crow laws were enacted and enforced to separate people of different races, not only in the South, but also across the country up until 1964. For example, in Georgia, specific laws prohibit any restaurant owner to serve two races within the same room. Dining facilities were designated for either white or black people exclusively. Traveling north to Virginia, a similar set of laws was set to restrict social interaction. Any person operating a public building was required to separate the white and black faces by designating specific seating or gathering places for each. Jim Crow laws were not only in effect in the South and East. Throughout the Midwest and West, there were also many laws separating African Americans from mainstream white society. An Oklahoma law in 1937 required telephone companies to maintain separate telephone booths. There were similar separate water fountains, restrooms, and doorways across the country, clearly marked so that there was no question about what would be enforced. Traveling to Kentucky in the 1950s, all forms of transportation were segregated. And in Missouri, as in many other places, public schools were established to prevent children of African descent from attending classes with the white students. In the state of Washington, in the 1950s, it was against the law for realtors to even introduce African Americans to a white neighborhood, another form of segregation that appeared in many communities. In the land where all men were created equal, Jim Crow laws were confusing and cruel, relegating African Americans to the role of second-class citizens. The United States Congress finally put an official end to Jim Crow laws with the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964.
My parents moved in to the house that was listed in the Green Book. And I grew up there until I was in the 3rd grade. So I have very fond memories of the house.
Hotels and restaurants, rooming houses, or boarding houses, where people stayed during the 40s and the 50s and early 60s, became a haven, a resting place, a place to stay, a place to meet during the height of the Civil Rights Movement.
I played Nina Davis in the Green Book play. She is a 17-year-old girl, only child. She lives in a home where travelers come in and they stay in the house. The Green Book is a whole subject in the Civil Rights Movement in that era that we skipped. And I've been going to school, 11 years now? And I can't tell you one time where the Green Book was mentioned.
Charlie's place was a supper club on Carver Street that was originally built approximately 1938.
And he had a gas station, a restaurant, club, and motel rooms.
Charlie's wife's name was Sarah Fitzgerald. Sarah and my mother were very, very close friends.
Charlie, for some reason, didn't allow himself to be discriminated against. And so he would come to Dad's restaurant, and Dad didn't mind. They became friends. He would sit at the little family table there.
And people got to know each other. You had white folk that had been Lindy hoppers that could dance. Dance just as good as good black folk that could dance well. And so they had no problem hanging.
Black and white, they had them mixed down there working, and who wasn't working, they was down there having a good time.
Dad would stop, have a VO with Charlie at his place. So I would go in there as a young child, and Charlie would fix me a sarsaparilla, and Dad would have a VO. They'd shoot the breeze a little bit. So I got to know Charlie in the restaurant. I got to know Charlie in his club.
They had a Klan raid there on the 26th of August, 1950.
And I remember my mother was crying, looking out the window, and because the Klan didn't like immigrants, they didn't like Jews, they didn't like anybody except WAS. So everybody was a little worried about who they were after.
This was a very traumatic experience. Can you imagine 35 to 40 cars pulling up to that place where we were today. Each car has about 5 hooded Klansmen, and they get out. They form a scrimmage line. They walk and fire. They're shooting into the building. There's people in the building. And it could have been a terrible thing, but Charlie did something quite heroic. Charlie walked right out there. He recognized, I would assume, there had been a gunfight and people had died on both sides. But he was courageous enough to put his own life on the line for his customers on the inside.
I think it's a blessing that somebody step up and say, let's save Charlie Place. And the person is Herbert Raleigh.
What we're going to do, we're going to take a couple of the old rooms and turn them into museum pieces, particularly with the decor from the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, the heyday of this building. And down back that way slightly, we're going to take a section, and it's going to be for the green room. We're going to dedicate it just to the Green Book and its history, because the Green Book showed people where they could stay at a time, Jim Crow, when it was quite dangerous. You had great musicians that came down here, and many tourists that came down here, and with the exception of Charlie's, Atlantic Beach, and a few other places, there was no place they could stay.
So the next step is to rehab the house and, turn that into museum/learning center, I guess you would say. Something where we can teach our kids about music. Charlie's Place, and it was before my time, I guess you would say, but I've heard all the stories about how James Brown, Otis Redding, and a lot of these guys used to come over there and sing when they finished playing on the boulevard somewhere. How can we, just save that part of history and, give our kids some inspiration in the neighborhood.
You can replace pride. And when Charlie Place was here, they give you pride. I mean, you had pride, everybody had their own business. You was proud. You was proud to be able to work and take care of your family.
When we get the museum up there and the offices up there, we build a business park. We got something to get the people over here. The businesses need to be designed to cater to the tourists. You got 18 million tourists coming here every year. Billions of dollars. All we want is a little piece of that.
Instead of scratching the surface, if we really dug deep and talked about things like the Green Book, in my opinion, and this might sound crazy, I believe that the racial tension in the school would ease a little bit.
Okay, so please welcome Maira Liriano, Ramsey, and Becky.
Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you can hear me. But to start with, I have a copy, it's not the original, of the Green Book.
But it's a pretty good reproduction. It's probably, this is from the 1940 issue. And it was green. And it's about this size. So to kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be talking about. Over time, it did change slightly, and, but this is kind of what a typical Green Book looked like.
Pass it around.
Oh yeah, sure, definitely. That'd be great. So before I start asking some questions of Calvin and Becky, we got to get the conversation started, and then we're going to open it up to all of you to ask questions and have the conversation. I'd like to read an introduction from the 1948 Green Book that Victor Green wrote. And it's something that has always, when I first read it, it really moved me, and it's something that still moves me when I read it today. But he wrote at the end of this introduction, so it's a full page, and it's the last paragraph. He writes, "There will be a day sometime in the near future when this guide will not have to be published. This is when we as a race will have equal opportunities and privileges in the United States. It will be a great day for all of us to suspend this publication, for then we can go wherever we please and without embarrassment. But until that time comes, we shall continue to publish this information for your convenience each year." So on that note, so Calvin and Becky, there's been a lot of works that have come out recently around the Green Books that have been inspired by the Green Books. And Calvin, you've talked about this, the children's book, the play, the musical. Really didn't get to talk about the musical. Your documentary, obviously. There's some other documentary works that are in the works. There's a lot of scholarship happening around the Green Books. I received an email from someone at the University of Chicago who just finished his dissertation. And I know there's several dissertations that have been published in the last few years around the Green Books, and there's several scholarly books that are coming out or have come out recently. As well, of course, the creative types, besides Calvin, Derrick Adams with his show. I just heard about a photography book that's coming out just this week on Tuesday. I heard about that. So a lot of creative work that's coming out of the inspiration of hearing this story. And I want to know what both of you think, like what happened that the Green Books largely disappeared from the collective consciousness and has only recently, in the last few years, kind of taken hold. And I think, Calvin, maybe starting with you, because I think your story about how you discovered the Green Books might kind of lead us into maybe hearing how the Green Books, how hearing about the Green Books inspired you to then create, might kind of explain how this all took off.
Okay, I think Danny and I was talking about this the other day, about what Victor Green had established along with his wife. It wasn't really a capitalist tool, you know, even though the publication eventually started paying for itself. His initial, I think, reason for going into this endeavor was to provide a service for people that really need a service. And since this wasn't really something that a capitalist structure or really promote, it wasn't something that quite fit the formula. It wasn't like an Ebony or a Jet or a Black Enterprise or a Local Life magazine. This was a service that he was providing. And a lot of times people traveling would stay at these places, and most of the time if they would leave something to show their gratitude under the pillow, on the dresser. But sometimes the people